Welcome to HCA Talks Health. I'm Zena le Roux, and our guest for today is Joanna Harper. So she's the author of The Trauma-Informed Coach, Strategies to Support Clients When Their Past Prevents Progress. She has a master's degree in transforming integrated health and social care, and she's also a British Integrative Master Coach and an accredited trainer who has trained and certified many coaches. Welcome, Joanna. It's really a privilege to have you on the show today.
Great to see you, Zena. Thank you for inviting me.
It seems like the topic of trauma, and of course being trauma-informed as a coach, lies quite close to your heart. So tell us more about your interest in this topic and where it all started for you.
Where it all started for me was with my own clients, or really with my own personal journey as well, through a serious health condition and using coaching adjunct and integrative techniques to help me with my own well-being. But what I noticed with my early clients when I was quite newly trained and only had a narrow skill set was that some would get the changes that they were really hoping for and reach their goals and achievements. And others would be really willing, but for some reason, just not able to achieve what they hoped or maintain. So they'd reach their goal, but then something would happen and they would not be staying with it. And I was really curious about this and started to look, this was in the early to mid 2000s, at the difference between those two types of clients. And this was before trauma and trauma techniques within coaching was really a thing. Before, for example, Bessel van der Kolk's book came out, didn't come out till 2014 or 2015. So I had limited resources to access. So I really looked at my own clients. And the common thread seemed to be that those that had disclosed something in their past seemed to be those that were not making the progress they were hoping for. And so that was just a theme I started to notice with my own clients. And at that time in my career, I had nothing to really be able to offer them, but it set me off on a journey of exploration and looking. And when I came across the adverse childhood experiences study, it was like lots of light bulbs were going off, and it was like, wow, okay, so actual medical people have looked at this. There's research. They looked at a large population size, 17,000 people, and this is the theory. So that's really what got me interested. And then I started to look for modalities that would be helpful to my clients and used myself as a guinea pig a lot of the time. So tried a few things out, and then also used things with clients and got their feedback. What was helpful to them? What's the most helpful to you? What's been the thing that makes the biggest difference for you? And so getting that sample back from clients, and if there's one thing that you take away from these sessions, what is it? And so those would be the things I would keep in when I kept hearing the same thing coming back. So that's where I got interested, curious, continued my own learning journey, and really worked in a collaborative way with my clients.
So the ACE study that you're referring to, it's the adverse childhood experiences and how that impacts our health as adults, right? But interestingly enough, so you're mentioning that when someone did disclose some event or some traumatic experience in their past, that it also prevented them from making progress and taking action in a coaching setup. So I'm sure many coaches listening today has experienced this before. When they're working with a client, they feel like, I don't know what else to do as a coach, but it just seems like this person is stuck. So how would you recommend as coaches should we respond when that happens?
I guess my answer to that is it will depend on the client. And it was one of the reasons really for writing the book, because it happened as a coach trainer and offering continual professional development to coaches. It happened very often in training sessions as well, that something would happen within a pairs work exercise or within a case study, and the coach or coachee would say, what do we do here? This isn't, we don't have a strategy for this. So that's where I started to put all of everything I'd collated into one really big, started off as a huge manual, but it was nothing like a book. So then I had to go through the process of turning it into a book. But what I developed were 10 core competencies to be trauma informed. So being if I define trauma informed in the context here, is to be informed about trauma. So not to be a therapist, not to do anything to help the client overcome or to talk about the past, because that's a different skill set to coaching. It's a different or additional training. But what do coaches do when this happens with their clients? And what do they do with disclosure? So often a client will answer a question that the coach didn't actually even ask. And so where does the coach go for that? And that's where the core competencies came from. And they also came from the main coaching organization's core competencies for the accreditation process. So it was really developing those, holding this idea of being informed about trauma, so trauma aware, trauma sensitive, and aware that there may be something more going on for this client if they're not able to make the progress.
Okay, so there's a big difference, and I think between being trauma informed, trauma sensitive, and working or dealing with trauma, right? That's where scope of practice comes in. So the role of the coach is to be informed and sensitive. So can you talk us through some of these core competencies?
Yes, I think they're really important, not just the competencies, but the order that they're in the book. And so the first one is acknowledgement. So acknowledging what's been disclosed, and really, I know in my own first coach training, it was just like, you just don't go there if the client brings up their past. And that, as a client, can feel like they're unbelieved, that they're not being heard, that it's they've done something wrong, that they're being rejected in some way. So it can be a really negative experience to just carry on coaching as if they didn't even say what they said. So acknowledging what's been said, even if we don't go anywhere with it in the coaching session and we just reset our boundaries, is really important. So the thanking for sharing and acknowledging and pausing and I hear you. I just need to remind you that this is coaching, and, start to give the client some options. And the follow-up question to that is also important, because it might help decide where to go next as the coach. And that is, have you told anyone before? And because there's a really big difference between someone that tells everyone and has had lots of therapy, done lots of different approaches, is happy to talk about their story, write about their story, tell random people what happened, to someone who's never disclosed, but for some reason, probably in the rapport, the trust that's been built up between them and their coach, they've said something. And so acknowledging the fact that you might be the first person they've ever trusted to tell something is very key here. And so the approach to both will be different. But you would also need to ask, or the coach really needs to also ask, particularly when it's way out of scope of practice, scope of training, scope of experience, what would you like to have happen now? So that we use a coaching question in order to find out from the client what they need from us, rather than ask them any details of what actually happens and getting more information. However curious we might be about what happened, that's not our role as the coach, to unpack what happened, unless we have extensive trauma and therapy training, and then take off the coaching hat and put on the therapy hat, and we recontract with the client if we've got a coaching contract with them.
I like that. What would you like to happen now after they've disclosed, even if you are the only person that they've shared that information with? Right. So,
Yes.
reconnecting, I guess, and creating that rapport, still creating a safe space for them when they are disclosing.
Absolutely. And I've already touched on it. So then boundaries, so making sure that we're working within a professional scope. And of course, that might depend on where we're coaching. So in our private one-to-one clients, the ability to switch modalities if we are an integrative coach and have more than one modality to offer. But of course, within workplace coaching, that may be completely outside of the scope of what we're contracted to do within that setting. And it still happens, and very often happens in a workplace setting. So again, managing that and staying within the coaching agreement is a really important element. But still making sure that we make that clear to the clients in front of us, that it's not that we don't want to help, but it's that we're not contracted to do that with them in this particular situation.
Yes, that's important. Yeah. Okay. And then the other core competencies?
So that sense of connection and the quality of our presence is really important, and the way that we manage our own state. So particularly for new coaches or less experienced coaches, if we're told something that sets something off in us, and we are dysregulated, or we go into our inner, oh, I don't know what to do here, we're not with the client.
Yeah.
So that sense of being with the client, the quality of our coaching presence is really important. And we can maintain that through being able to self-regulate our state. And when we're regulated, we can help the client regulate through us being regulated. So even if they're in a state of heightened alert or distress, our presence can be calming, even online. So as you and I are speaking together through a screen, that the quality of our state will still influence the person that we're connecting with. So that's really, really important. So, and that's something to take to supervision if it happens, is I got this thing and I reacted in this way, and I stopped thinking about the client because I started wondering what to do and what question to ask. And if we're regulated, the clarity of our thought is so much clearer. And having these clear steps in a strategy is also important. So even if it's never happened, and it never does happen, but it's likely that it will at some point for coaches, knowing, oh, I've got a protocol, I've got some steps to follow, I've got some guidelines here that I can use, can be really helpful, because it can save us. It can just give me a moment. I'm just going to get some resources out for you, and they can be prepared ahead of time. So you can have something to hand out in the form of a handout, for example, or website links, referring on to other professionals and so on. So having those things prepared so that then when we're in that situation, we don't disconnect from the client, because that sense of connection, the quality of that connection is so key.
Yes.
The next one is about psychoeducation, really. So, and this is about us educating ourselves. And again, this was another purpose of the book and the whole section on the introduction to polyvagal and introduction to various state management techniques and various trauma theories. So if we understand, and of course new information is emerging all the time, research is developing all the time, but if we can in simple terms be able to understand what happens when someone is in a fear or survival response, or was, and how they responded at the time, because they may feel deep shame, for example, or guilt about how they behaved at the time. But if they understand the neurophysiology of what happened, it can really help them understand how they were behaving and responding at the time. And if we can explain it in really simple terms, because when someone's in that heightened state, giving them loads of technical information is not really going to be processed by them at the time. So again, it might be in the form of having a handout or a short video for people to watch when they're more regulated. So coach needs to be educated. That's the whole point of being trauma informed, but also be able to help the client understand what's happening for them.
And I think it's an important understanding for the client to realize that there's nothing wrong with me, but it's the state. It's a survival mechanism that is maybe causing
Absolutely.
some of the reactions. Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And understanding that can really help people with letting some of all the attached emotions and beliefs and behaviors go. It's one of the first steps, the acknowledgement element. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. And
And
then,
where we can really help our clients, number 5 is the empowerment piece. So teaching clients to build their own resilience and give them some self-coaching skills, some self-awareness and self-regulation skills can really help them outside the coaching session. So again, moving away from the model of doing therapy to people, but empowering them instead so that they can help themselves and be much more resourced when a tricky situation outside of coaching comes along, and they can respond in a more resourceful way, and or they can notice, oh, I did that thing again. Okay, I know how to calm myself now. I know how to release all that tension and anger or stress, whatever it is that they're experiencing. So having those skills that we can pass on to others, or referring them to someone who can teach them those skills, because that's also our role as the coach, is to refer on, which is one of the other competencies of the 10.
so I mean, it could become the G of great in that context, where of the great coaching model, where the goal is to figure out how to regulate myself in a better way, or to regulate my state better. So it could be part of a coaching conversation.
Absolutely. And an interactive session, it could be, if we have the skills to learn to teach someone to regulate their state. But through our own regulation, we're co-regulating. So
Yes.
even if we don't have the skills to teach them directly, we might refer them on to someone who has, or someone local that runs sessions, for example. It could be that it's something like self-defense, and that real physical activity of self-defense classes can really empower someone to, if I'm in this situation again, I've got a little bit of a different attitude and some different ways of responding now.
And I guess also preventing it from happening again.
Absolutely,
Taking
yes.
out of that situation if possible.
Yes, because very often people do find themselves in similar situations. So that element of "it always happens to me" is a really important part that we can be aware of when we hear that from our clients. So giving them new ways of responding will give them different outcomes.
Yes.
Yeah. And prevention and safeguarding. So raising awareness, and I think it's really important that all coaches do some safeguard training, which is very often low cost or free online, but having a way of helping coaches become aware of what might be a current at-risk, vulnerable individual, child, or situations, being suicide aware and having safeguarding training, I think are essential in this arena of work, and particularly in this current times.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So referring on, I've kind of already alluded to, that's really important. So building our own network of local people or good online people that we're connected to, where we think, if this one's outside my scope of practice, or they would be better suited to, or we've asked the client what they want and they've said, I would like to go to a therapist now, or a counsellor, for example. If we're staying within the coaching arena, then having some reliable professionals that we can safely hand the client on to. So there's that transference, that they're not just left with, oh, I'm going to have to go and find someone now, that we might be able to help them with that. And if we can't, being really honest and saying, I'd love to help you, but I don't really know anyone that does that particular modality, for example, if they're really specific on what they want. But being a signpost can be part of what we have prepared. Having our professional policies and procedures prepared as well. So if we do need to make a client referral, we've already got all of that. That we've covered things like data protection, safeguarding I've already mentioned, because in those situations that are usually emotionally charged, having a tick list of I need to do this can be the way that we really stay focused as well.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess it would be even more beneficial if we have met some of those professionals, if we maybe had even some experience of working with them ourselves, or know someone else who had a good experience, instead of just referring them on to some random professional who we're not
Absolutely
going to support them in the best way.
Yes. Back in the day, I used to work in a multidisciplinary clinic, but now pretty much everything I do is online. So I used to know face to face the people that I would refer to, but now I do mostly have an online network because so many of us work online. But I still know these people. They're not just random people I've done a Google search for.
At least, yes. Okay, so core competency 9, I guess, is being strength focused.
Yes, this is moving away from the problem and focusing on what the client does have. And this is a really key and an area that the coach can really bring the coaching skills to. Because very often clients will forget that they have any resources at all when they're in a really unresourceful state. And so getting them regulated in their state will help them access their resources. And of course, it's an area where we can coach around and really focus on their strengths so that there's that counterbalance as well. So state regulation, strengths focus, coming away from the problem state to the resourceful state. All of those are the area that the coach can coach in. Yeah.
I like that. And I love that question, because often when a client comes into your space, they would, they tend to share a lot of everything what's going wrong, even if there's no trauma related history, what's going wrong. And I think that's a really powerful question, but what can you do? What is possible? So just shifting that focus once again to that resourceful state.
Yes. And also asking what's worked in the past, because very often they've tried lots of things and it will be, oh, I used to really love doing this, but for some reason I stopped, or my teacher moved away, or I just didn't have time, and so on. And so then the what's stopping you reconnecting now is a good question. And it might be that they don't want to go back to something they've previously done, but that spark of interest might be useful somewhere else in their world. So, yeah.
Okay, then finally, the last one is training and professional development.
Absolutely. So yes, if someone's just done or just finishing or even currently doing a coach training, then that's their coach training. But to move into the world of being beyond just trauma sensitive, so I would say these coaching competencies help coaches become trauma sensitive, trauma aware. To be trauma informed or move towards trauma skilled, working more in the therapeutic arena, then of course a lot of additional training is important. And there's a lot of training out there. So really looking for a trainer that has a good background. And there's so much on social media, and it's pretty superficial, surface level, very much sort of, sound bites of trauma informed, but really to understand it, then proper training. And I've already mentioned safeguarding training and other trainings to really help broaden out the skill set of the coach, particularly if they're working with a client base where disclosure or current stress and distress is likely to be happening. Because it doesn't have to necessarily be in the past. It can be in the present. It can be in the now. People can be in very vulnerable, difficult, challenging situations when they come to us. So it's current and live, not necessarily always historical. Yeah.
Okay, so this gives us a really great structure in terms of how to respond when a client brings something to the session. They're disclosing some trauma. They may be sharing it for the first time with you, or maybe not. But yes, I think it's a good structure to follow. But there's one thing that you mentioned earlier. So your state as a coach is very important in all of this, because when you are triggered and you maybe go into a stress response, then you won't be able to show up in the best way possible for your client. So I guess this goes beyond the session, right? So it's not just about what you do in that session, but it's about regulating, having practices in place to regulate your nervous system on maybe a daily or weekly basis if necessary. So can you maybe share with us a few ideas on how coaches could do that?
Yes, again, it could be dependent on how the coach likes to regulate. Very often we might think we're more regulated than we are. So having a daily practice, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, is better than no practice at all. And doing something before the coaching session, so just immediately prior, or if we have a busy day, doing something between clients. So I use some of the strategies that I've included in the book, some breathing techniques, to really let one client go so that I can move on to the next session or the next the client or group of that I'm working with. So that's really important. So even if we've just got a short window of time between clients, resetting and letting go can be really important. But the reason we call it a practice is it is a practice. So having something that helps us regulate. I use breathing techniques, but they include movement. So for some people, sitting still in meditation or observing the breath can be quite challenging, and particularly with those with trauma and strong emotions and sensations in their body when they come to that place of stillness. So pairing movement with the breathing can be really useful. And again, this is an area of expertise and additional training, particularly if we're going to teach it to our clients, but going to a regular fitness class or going to having some way, might be running or cycling, swimming, listening to music, dancing around, putting music on in the room and just having a bit of a dance. Whatever is useful for the coach will be the thing that they're likely to do. And we usually do the practice we enjoy the most. So finding something we enjoy, we're more likely to do it. But it's that commitment to practice that's really important for state regulation.
And you touch on some of these strategies or techniques in the book, right? So referring to polyvagal theory, for example, which could be a really good thing to read up or to do more training on to realize how can I do this and how can I better regulate myself. So this is the structure that you've just shared with us is the right way. I know there isn't just one right way. It's going to depend on the client, but it's it's to support the client in the best way possible. But are there things that we should be cautious of as coaches when we do pick up on trauma? Or have you ever found that a coach could actually do more harm than good?
Yeah, I think this is, again, coming back to the contracting and boundaries, is really know what we are trained to do, what we're experienced, what we've got the support to do, and also the time that we have. So unpacking something with 10 minutes before the end of the session, which is not an uncommon thing, that door handle moment of the client saying something, the real reason why they're there, or they suddenly feel safe enough to share and trusting enough to share, because actually they're going to be leaving the room in a few minutes, or ending the call in a few minutes. So knowing the timing, even if we are trauma trained, is that might be something for the next session, and get it booked in as soon as possible. But I think a lot of people come to coaching because they want to help others. And so they're empathic, compassionate people. And so they may just let the client talk. And that's not really coaching. So they might slide out of the coaching frame and into the being a great listener, but that, of course, can have a negative impact on them, the coach. They're exposed to vicarious trauma through listening to someone's distress stories. And, of course, the client can go into a really negative state because they're reliving rather than remembering what happened to them. So the client may feel unburdened by the end of the session and go away feeling a bit better because they've shifted, but the coach may be impacted by what they've just been exposed to, or the opposite, that the can of worms, the metaphorical can of worms or Pandora's box has been opened and there's no way to get the lid back on, and the coach doesn't have the resources, the referral network, the skills yet So that's where the more training is absolutely essential, because we can get into tricky situations through lack of experience and lack of training.
Yes, and you might think that you're doing your job as a coach because you're just showing up as a good listener, because we've been taught to be good listeners. And in this case, it's not what is needed, right? Because it could be re-traumatizing if a client is just talking and talking it through. So yeah, we should be cautious of that. I agree. So we've been using the word trauma for quite a bit, and some listeners might think, okay, so what exactly are we referring to? Is this a big motor vehicle accident or sexual abuse? Maybe we should just define that. So when we're referring to trauma, how do you define it?
That's a really good question, because there isn't one global agreed definition for trauma. So it's what's traumatizing and distressing to the individual. Yeah. So people can go through a similar experience, and one will flourish as a result of it, and another one might end up with deep distress and potentially even developing post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what is trauma? It's how we respond at the time, and then it's the lasting impact afterwards as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a big event. It can be a series of what might be considered smaller events, but I really want to keep away from the model of big T trauma and little t trauma, because actually the nervous system just experiences it in the same way, that it's dysregulating, distressing, it's strong emotions, strong sensations, and the client's not able, or the individual's not able to move on from it. Then reliving it, remembering it repeatedly, re-experiencing it, possibly changing their behavior because of what happens, or not able to move on. Remembering life as being different before an event and after, and almost like they're two separate lives. So it can be so individual to what happened.
Yeah, so I guess if it comes to trauma, it's quite individual. And maybe if someone is more sensitive, then they might have experienced something as traumatizing, where they felt out of control, and it impacted their life in a certain way. And someone else might look at it and think, what? How did that impact you? And I think as a coach, that's also an important sensitivity to have. So when someone is sharing something with you and you don't think this doesn't sound like trauma, still holding the space in a similar way. But when I'm thinking about trauma, and maybe some listeners, they might think, oh, it's something that happened to me when I was young, or still currently happening. But what about transgenerational or multi-generational trauma? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I think it's a really important consideration. And I just want to pick up on what you just said about people responding in different ways, because very often there might be lots of predating experience, so it's cumulative. Yeah. So there's that element of it becoming more complex, and then it might be a seemingly small thing that's the tipping point for an individual. So it's like, well, there's just this tiny little prang in the car park happened, but it sent me off in this spiral. But there's lots that predates that event that created that eventuality for that client in that moment, or that individual in the moment. Okay. So yeah, moving on to transgenerational trauma, we think in terms of being raised by a parent who has unresolved trauma issues. So for example, an alcoholic parent who uses alcohol to regulate how their feelings and emotions, the impact that will have on the children as they're growing up. So the trauma of the unresolved trauma or unresolved issues of the parent will impact the childhood. And then, of course, if it goes back through multi-generations, so the grandparenting and so on, so it's this is how we are in our family, and this is how we parent, or this is how we behave, or our family are like this. So it could be that element that is referred to as multi-generational or transgenerational. Of course, it can also be within an environment, so living within an area. As one of the case studies in the book was of someone who'd lived in and grown up in Ireland during the times of the Troubles, and his brother was killed and his father was a drinker, and so there's this whole element of how that impacts him. So that's something to consider. And then there's increasing research, and it's not something I'm an expert in and haven't done so much reading around, of the element of memories that are passed on through our genes. So that even if it's not something we've been directly impacted by, that there's some resonance there. It's something I'd like to look at more, so I don't want to talk too much about it because I haven't read deeply on it and looked at the research, but I think it's an area of interest, and if coaches are interested in that, to certainly start to look at the again, there's no international terminology for trauma and trauma terms when we start to look at the diagnostic tools and so on, which again I discuss in the book. So what really looking at the terminology that the paper or the research or the book that we're reading, so where that term came from. So is it a term that the authors are using, or is it a term that's been acknowledged by, for example, an organisation?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think, if readers or listeners are interested, they could read Bessel van der Kolk's book, where he mentions quite a bit on how trauma is stored in the body, right? It's a memory that is stored in the body, and there's some explanation around that, how it could be, shared from one generation to the next. Someone listening today might think, oh gosh, I do have a lot of trauma, or my parents had a lot of trauma. Am I doomed? Am I screwed, for the rest of my life? What is your experience? Can someone still grow and transform and flourish despite or even due to adverse detrimental life circumstances and situations?
Yes, absolutely. And some do. That actually a big event, rather than being the tipping point, which I mentioned earlier, can be the wow, I got through that. I somehow got through that. So therefore they start to live life in a much more optimal way and start to do things rather than put them off in time, for example. I think when we start to look at positive psychology and strengths focus, looking at all of those areas of flourishing and despite adversity. So if we can, as coaches, have a broad awareness of focusing up on the positive, but being really careful not to negate the negative, that needs to be resolved, whether it's through another professional or, for example, we've talked about state regulation, trauma being held within the body, again, mind-body practices and movements, and again, specialist trained individuals delivering these sessions can really help, because trauma doesn't just emerge as a memory of something that happened. It might be a sensation, emotion, or a feeling that feels like it's come from nowhere very often. But when mind-body practices and state regulation is a daily practice, that can really help how people respond as well. So there's the mindset element and the strengths focus and the flourishing focus. And then there's the mind-body connection. And I don't really want to use that word connection, because the mind and the body are one. And particularly if we think of the somatic based coaching, that the information is held within the body as well. So working with the whole individual rather than just talking to their conscious mind. And that again is another area of coaching, the connecting with the the body and the wisdom of the body and the somatic psychology element could be really powerful, particularly when people don't have a specific memory. They just have a sense of unease, or just there's something not quite right, but they don't really know what it is. That there's no narrative there to that, and there's no need for it, because through regulation and somatic work, those issues can be eased. So yes, whatever's happened to us in our past, because trauma's part of everyday life. We only need to put the TV, the radio, or the newsfeed on to be exposed to something happening somewhere, often quite close by these days, to within the world, to be exposed to trauma. And we don't need to be directly impacted by it to still be traumatized by something. So witnessing something firsthand, even on a live stream, can be traumatizing. So vicarious trauma is recognise that exposure to other people's events can be deeply distressing and disturbing, and again could be the tipping point for some people.
Exactly. So you use the term somatic coaching, so where you're working with the body. So how does this differ from integrative coaching? Because I know you use the term quite a bit in your book.
Yeah, so integrative coaching, it's really, there is no one model or one technique. And if we go broader into the therapy and medical world, there's no one pill, no one anything that fixes everyone, because if there was, we'd all be fixed by now. So having more than one model, more than one skill, so that we can really work individually with the clients, rather than taking them through a specific set of questions or model, that we bring what we need to bring as coaches to the client. And as we've already discussed in some depth, if we're not the right individual to do that with this particular client, then referring them to someone that can. So we don't have to train in everything. We need to train in the things we want to use with our own clients, and really focus up on the modalities that make the biggest difference for the individuals that we work with. So I have my particular favourites, and some of them I've mentioned, and eye movement techniques is another way, and another great adjunct training. So I tend to use breath work, movement. So the movement element, not just the breathing, can really help people move through something. And eye movements as well can help process not just visual memories, so they're like a movie scene or photograph type memory, but that those sensations, the somatic elements, can be really useful as well. Yeah.
That's interesting that you're sharing some of these snippets of the techniques that you use, but is there maybe a specific client or an example of a client that you've worked with to share with us how you did it, or should we go and read more about it in your book?
There's 5 case studies in the book. So I alluded earlier, when I was writing the book, it was really just a really big manual to start with. Yeah. And what made it become a book was the case studies. Mm-hmm. And they are based on real clients, but they're not real clients. So they're sort of composites of different clients I've worked with over the years. And they're also a demonstration of trauma theory in action. So yes, I could tell you about one specific client, but what I really liked, something that somebody who'd read my book said to me recently, and probably only last week, was now I've done my training, and now I've worked with some clients and some case studies, I'm rereading the book and I'm getting so much more from the case studies because I can think about my own clients. Yeah. So rather than sort of tell about a specific client, I would say, even if you only reread the case studies section of the book, because hopefully the listeners, or certainly people will now go and read the book, but then reread the book thinking about your own clients. And that really helps. Oh, yes, I remember responding in that way, being the coach responding in a certain way, or I remember a client. And so it will help to understand your own coaching and your own And also it might be, well, I wouldn't do that with my own clients because I'm not trained in that, or I'm a bit curious about that. I'd like to find out more about that element. Because each client I work with is individual. And so I might work in a specific way with one client and then the next client completely differently because they bring something different. And the question I talked about, what would you like to have happen? The way they answer that one will tell me how to work with them. So the client usually tells us how to work with them.
Yeah.
That said, I do have some favourite techniques. So I've already mentioned eye movement. So if there's a strong memory, a specific significant event that can really stop clients from moving forward at all, I'd go straight there. So as long as there's no reasons not to within the contracting of that particular client, or there are a couple of precautions and it is a specific training to do. So I'm not saying to coaches, start doing eye movements with your clients, see what happens, come and do the training and then apply that. And then teaching clients outside of the session to do some state regulation we've already touched on. So I would say those are the key elements. So something inside the session to help them move on, and something that they can go away from the session with some skills, some new skills or new ways of managing their state between sessions. So those are the key elements when we're working with the more complex clients where we need to see them over a number of sessions.
Yeah. I get through all of this, what I'm hearing is you really keeping the client in the driving seat, because depending on how they answer that question, what would they like to have happen, is going to depend on how you're going to address the situation further, right? So we're responding to what they said and we're holding that space for them in that way. So thank you, Joanna. I think it's such important work that you're doing. Is there anything else that you feel like we haven't touched on that you want to maybe leave our listeners with? Any final thoughts or anything else you want to highlight?
I've already touched on the rereading, and that was going to be my final thought. But I think also, having touched on case studies, there's one case study in the book, the middle one, who nearly wasn't in there, because I've said it in the book a few times that some clients are just outside our scope of practice and we just shouldn't even be working with them. And so I'd put it in the book, and then I was thinking, I need to show this, not just tell it. So the middle case study, Pandora, is literally the box I don't open. So it's my little in-joke to myself during the writing process. And so I think the takeaway is really do know when to proceed with coaching and when to cease or refer on, because we're not for everyone and not everyone's for us. But if we come back to those core coaching competencies, that if we can safely transfer them to someone that they can help, or a methodology that can help them, then that's us fulfilling our role as a coach.
Exactly. Thank you. So if clients want to or listeners want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
They can find me through my website, which is after the W's, integratetraining.co.uk. I'm based in the south coast of the UK. So if they are also based in the south coast, I'm just returning after 5 years of only doing things online to doing a little bit of in-person training. So it'll be a little bit in London, a little bit in the south coast. So yeah, find me through the website, and of course through the book. At the back of the book there's all the contact details, so they can catch up with me or connect with me.
Do you yourself present training?
Yes, I do. Right? Yes.
Yeah. So
yes. Yeah.
Can you tell us a quick word?
Absolutely. So we run, because I have a team, but I lead most of the courses. I run breath, body, mind training, which I talk about in the book. We've talked about state regulation. Those skills are great for coaches. Lots of coaches come on that training. It's great for them themselves and their personal practice. And then also integral eye movement therapy, which is a great technique to move away from being trauma or towards trauma skilled. So I would say breath, body, mind is very much trauma informed. We're very trauma sensitive in the way that we work. We work with large groups internationally in crisis situations, and we also train one-to-one therapists to work with their clients. So those that work with groups, that's a great course as well. And then we do some neuro-linguistic programming training as well. So yeah, lots to offer.
Great. So if someone's wanting to join, they can find all of that on the website, right?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Great.
And there's a new event. Oh, and of course, I've forgotten the most obvious. We do trauma-informed coach training a couple of times a year. So yes, you can come and be trauma-informed. So the book is just the book, and the course has its own big manual. And we put a lot of the theory into practice. It's quite a practical 3-day, so it's 18 hours over 3 days course, as very specifically designed for coaches and practitioners to become trauma informed and move towards trauma skilled.
Yeah. Right. And also a little birdie told me that you're busy writing another book. What is, I guess it's also trauma, the topic. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah. So quite deep into the writing process at the moment. I hope to have the first draft finished in the next couple of months, and then the process of getting it to be a book that can be published will be the next phase, which is almost as long as the writing. So yes, I've mentioned integral eye movement therapy. So it's a book where there'll be case studies. There's 3. So I can tell you the name of one of them. One of them's called Max. And yes, so he's nearly finished as a case study. There's 2 other case studies, and it's very specifically using the eye movement techniques, but also all the adjunct skills around those clients. So it's really for people who are either interested in that particular training and technique and want to know more, or for someone who's done the training and then gone, I don't really know where to start with my clients. So it's much like the trauma-informed coach book. It's quite practical. There's quite practical elements to it as well.
Sounds good. We're really looking forward to that coming out soon. So thank you, Joanna. I think, coaches should be trauma informed. I think that's so important. We need to be aware of how trauma can impact ourselves, but also our clients, and specifically their ability to take action or move forward. Because I think there could be a lot of frustration around that topic if someone's not moving forward. So being trauma informed, being trauma sensitive is crucial. And you really shared some valuable information with us today on exactly how coaches can do that. So thanks again for your time and for the important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Zena. Great to chat with you. Thank you.
If you have a passion for health and wellness, and you would like to make a difference in the lives of others and discover a new rewarding career in health and well-being coaching, visit www.healthcoachesacademy.com to find out more.